Why are these competitors meeting together and coming to some kind of an agreement? These guys dominated most of the wealth of the world. And here they were putting together a piece of legislation. And some historians have referred to that as the dawning of the age of the cartel, a banking cartel.
Now, when you say most of the wealth in the world, how much money are you talking about?
Yeah, I have no idea, but it's unimaginable.
So what's been the positive impact and the negative impact?
I cannot think of any positive
Any,
impact.
none.
It's a parasite. It's a fraud. It's based on a lie. They have to talk endlessly about stabilizing the economy and making jobs and preserving the purchase power of the dollar and all these good things. That's just for cover. All they're concerned about is what is best for the banks.
So then that means the Federal Reserve, all it did is it became an insurance policy to prevent banks from going out of business.
It was not real insurance at all. It was a political scheme. The Federal Reserve, which is supposed to be the guardian to prevent all of this stuff, gets a failing mark on its report card.
So how have the American people paid a price for the 1913 Federal Reserve Act?
This idea of money, there's been no country that's ever survived. It's always collapsed economically.
Is it media? Is it politicians? Is it China? What is the biggest threat today that we're facing?
As long as the human and this planet can be programmed and passively accept a condition where they accept authority without question, there is no hope for mankind.
My guest today is G. Edward Griffin, somebody that you may not know a lot about, but the people in the business world, the money world, the world that follows capitalism, maybe some of the people that follow the red pill, the people that take the red pill. He wrote a book, Creature from Jekyll Island. If you've never read this book, it's a second look at the Federal Reserve. This book has sold nearly 1 million copies. He's written 48 books, done documentaries. He was in the military before. And he's someone that can give you a different perspective on the words of capitalism, socialism, and the current state of things in America that can get you to think a little bit. So I'd like you to watch today's interview from an open mind. With that being said, G. Edward Griffin, thank you so much for being a guest on Value Chamber.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure.
And I have to give this disclaimer to everybody so they're not confused that you are not Anthony Hopkins' brother. You guys are not related, yes or no? We just have, everybody needs to know that.
No, we're not related.
Okay, all right, so now that we have set that aside, let's get right into it. Look, I got a lot of things I'd like to speak to you about. Obviously, things are weird right now. Economy's weird right now. You know, the pandemic's changed the game. Protesting, riots, vaccine, election. A lot of things are going on. But I'd like to kind of go a little bit back to you writing this book, because we've had a lot of guests on that I asked about the Federal Reserve. Why was it started? How was it started? You know, there's a lot of different stories to it. And I've had a Danielle DiMartino Booth, who's an economist. She has a complete different spin on what she thinks about the Federal Reserve and Jekyll Island. And Nomi Prince, who's also an economist, former Goldman Sachs, a member of Goldman Sachs. She tells the story very similar to the way you tell it, but I want to hear it from you. You know, you wrote this book to highlight and give people a different perspective of how the Federal Reserve was started. So, number one, how was it started? What was the outcome? Who was involved? Why did it happen?
Okay, I love that, starting from the beginning. Of course, that's not really the beginning, because the Federal Reserve is an extension of the scheme of banking that was generated in Europe hundreds years prior to this. But the action starts, as far as we're concerned, in America in the year 1910. The Federal Reserve Act was passed into law in 1913. The action was going on before that. And basically what we're talking about here is that at that period of history, the turn of that last century, there was a lot of concern among the American people about banking. They were angry at the banks. The banks were failing. They weren't keeping their promises to guard the deposits that people had. They thought their deposits were being held in the vault. Oh, silly assumption, when in fact all the money was being loaned out. Yet the banks were saying, yeah, it's a demand deposit. You give us the money. You can have it any time you want it. Just come and ask for it. And that worked only for about 7% of the deposits. The rest of them were all loaned out. And so when people started to come and ask for the deposits, it didn't take long before those lines exceeded 7%, and the banks had to close their doors. Some of them went bankrupt, people lost their savings, it crushed the economy a couple of times. And people were concerned, and they were ready for the economy. And they were saying, we want a law to control these big bad bankers. Well, So the cry was out, the alarm was out, and the politicians, they always listen to their constituents. They listen to the ones that send checks with their letters better than the ones that don't. But anyway, they listened, and so they decided they were going to pass a law to control the banks in America. So this is where the story begins in my book on Jekyll Island. What the heck is that all about? It turns out that the top bankers decided they weren't going to wait around for Congress to come up with a law to control their industry. They decided, why should we wait around to see what happens and how we're going to deal with it? We will create the law. We will be in the lead in calling for reform. So we must not let the world know we are doing it. So it was necessary to lay their initial plan under conditions of considerable secrecy. And so they decided not to do it in Washington, D.C. They decided to meet with each other. They all got on that railroad car. Senator Aldrich, who was the senator in charge of drafting this new legislation, he was the chairman of the National Monetary Commission, and he had a private, very wealthy guy. He was related in many ways, financially and in bloodline, to a lot of the bankers. So he had a private railroad car, and he invited all the banker buddies that he was familiar with to get on that train, and they took a 2-night and a day trip south to Jekyll Island, Georgia. And there they crossed from Brunswick, Georgia. They crossed the inland straits, took a ferry boat across. There's a bridge there now, but then they had to take a ferry boat. And the island was owned by these bankers and some of the great industrialists that they lived. It was a private resort island, and it was called the Jekyll Island Club. They had a beautiful clubhouse there. It's still there, by the way. I'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. And so they went there, and they sat around a table for a whole week, and they hammered out the deal that they were going to draft the reform bill that the public was clamoring for. But they had to do this in secret, because if the wind had gotten a whiff, if it had been on the wind and people knew that the bankers were drafting this bill, of course the cat would have been out of the bag, and nobody would have taken it seriously. So it was a great task to keep it secret. When I looked at that, I decided there are very few wars in history that were planned under greater secrecy than that. I won't bore you with the details, but some of the details are interesting. Is that they decided to go to the railroad station in New Jersey one by one. The instructions were, don't be seen together, don't have dinner together, and to avoid newspapers at all costs. In those days, the newspaper reporters used to hang out at that station because that was the main way in and out of New York, was through the railroad station there. And so they would wait for a celebrity or a politician to show up, and they'd grab a picture and get an interview. And so they were worried about that, and that's why they didn't want to be seen together. One of these guys, who was a banker, carried a shotgun, a big black case, kind of conspicuous, and he was prepared to, if he had been shot, where's he going? He would have, I'm going on a duck trip. And it's funny because we find out later from his children who commented about this and gave testimony on it, and his biographer, who all said that he never fired a shotgun or any kind of gun.
Wow. Yeah.
He borrowed that shotgun from a friend. This is where he could use that as an excuse. They didn't want anybody to know that they were going to be, together on this kind of a meeting because it would raise questions. Even when they got on board the train, they were instructed, when talking to each other in the privacy of the car, to address each other by last, by first name only, not the last name. And then one of them wrote in his memoirs years later that yes, they did do that. And he said the reason we did it is we didn't want the servants on board the train to know who we all were. So they addressed each other by first name, and two of them even created false first names. They called each other Orville and Wright, the two Wright brothers, because they said they were always right.
Yeah.
It's kind of a joke. So anyway, they got there. Everything was secret. They had dismissed the usual employees on the island. They had all part-time employees. Everything was done so the world would never know such a meeting took place. When I read that, I thought, okay, when something is done in secret, there's usually something behind. What is it? They were who often would compete with each other for big deals, big loans, and so forth. And it would raise questions and say, why are these competitors competing together, coming to some kind of agreement? And it wouldn't take long before they would figure out, and after all, this was the turn of the last century, some of the players would have said that as dawning well, this is exactly what they created. It's not a government agency, but it's really a Shell, no different than a banana, oil company. So all of these things had to be concealed from the public, which is why they wanted to get right. So when they got it all done, they went back to Washington, D.C. as far as the cartel agreement, and figuratively speaking, he took an eraser and erased the name cartel agreement from the top of it. And for political purposes, it became now known as the Federal Reserve Act. It became a bill. So we know nothing Congress did. Really didn't understand what was going on, but they thought, well, this is legislation. That's going to make me look good because I can say I'm also banking with them. So they voted for it, thinking it was really banking reform. All about how to preserve the advantages that the banks had and how they could continue to dominate the whole financial industry without new competition coming in and displacing their strong positions. And they could do it in the name of service. Not only that, there was a bonus system. They had gone there just primarily just to control their own industry so that no one could think of the deal. But before they walked out of the public open, they had gotten the power to create the nation's money. That was not part of the industry. It's hard to figure out who thought of that, but it would have been absurd to say that this nation, the United States, just like all nations had its sovereign right to issue its own money, would give up that right and give it to the private banks. Okay, we're not going to issue the United States money. We'll let the private banks issue the United States money. And nobody will notice that it was a switch, because it will still say United States of America at the top of the bills, but instead of saying United States of America Treasury note, now it says United States of America Federal Reserve. So they got everything they wanted plus a bonus, which was to capture control of the ability to issue money on behalf of the United States. So that is the short version of what happened. And how is that? Nobody understood it. It was complicated. It was concealed in a very academic type language. And college professors talking about it, innovation, this, and words that nobody ever heard of. But it was really one of the greatest. That's what I discovered when I started to read about it. So I just decided to tell the story not as like a textbook on money and banking, but as the story of a crime, which it was. So instead of talking about the details of banking, I talked about the crime, who did it, why they did it, how they did it, and where they buried the body, and what that means to us.
So, you know, when Sir G, when somebody listens to that, if you're comfortable with me calling you Mr. G, is that okay with you?
Well, that's absolutely okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So, you know, when I listen to your story and you're going through this, so on one end, it's very convincing, and I say, okay, this is great. I cannot believe this took place. These guys are getting together. On the other end, if I'm a skeptic, and some people who are not fans of yours, they may say, well, what are your sources? How did you get all this research, to get all this data? Where did that come from? Why should somebody sit here and say, well, he's telling the truth, he's not? You know, internet research, what kind of research were you getting? Did you meet these folks? Did you interview their assistants? Where did you get your information from?
Yeah, that's a very important issue, because when I started down this track, I understood I was dealing with information that really I had never heard about before. And it was almost unbelievable, even when I'm looking at the documents. I think, is this true? Can't be true. And I knew that it was true, but I knew that people would suspect it. So from the beginning, I decided that I wouldn't put anything in there unless I could document it. Now, document how? From original sources. In other words, everything I have said a moment ago, everything in the bloody book is documented from references that are made by the people themselves who participated in this crime. I'm talking about their own private letters, their own documents, their own books, their own family talking about this is the research. None of it comes from critics of the Federal Reserve. Almost every one of them are either neutral about it or very fond of the Federal Reserve system. And I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes I think if I have too many footnotes in my book, I've got just hundreds, if not thousands of footnotes.
I mean, I see it. I just want to make sure the viewer gets that as well, to know that where the content came from.
I did not want to have to have stand in front of an audience and blush and say, well, I don't know where I got that. Somebody said so. That was not going to work. So, it all comes from the sources of the people themselves who were putting this creature together.
Got it. And who were they?
I might add, they were very proud of what they were doing. They thought that it was a great thing. Their mentality appears to be that, we understand that this is something that the average person probably shouldn't know about because they might be alarmed if they thought that there was that much power in their hands. But after all, it's necessary because they're too stupid to understand how great a system they're putting together is for them. It's for their own good, you understand. It's kind of their mentality. So they, I think, in their own mind, thought that everything they were doing was for the betterment of mankind, and the fact that it happened to make them billionaires didn't do that.
For some people that don't know these individuals that were involved in this meeting, who were the people actually involved in the meeting at Brookline?
Yeah, that's important to know that. These are all the heads of the biggest banks in America with connections to the biggest banks in the world. And remember, these are some of the competitors that are coming together. I'd like to read their names to you. The first one I've already mentioned is there's also a business JP Morgan, and Abraham T. That's what they come from the banking.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, so you talk about regulatory capture. The banks have taken over the U.S. Treasury. Everything to do with money in the federal government. And this had already happened back in this day. Frank A. Vanderlip was the president of the First National City Bank of New York. And that was one of the most powerful banks at the time. William Rockefeller and the Henry P. Davison, who was the senior partner of J.P. Morgan Company. Benjamin Strong was there. He was head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. Paul Warburg was there. He was more important than all the others in terms of putting it together because he was the guy that had the connections in Europe. He was a partner in the Kuhn Loeb and Company. He also represented the banking fraternity, the clan, you might call it, that dominated Europe at the time, France and England in particular. And his brother Max Warburg was the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. So you put all these things together, these guys dominated about, most of the wealth of the world. And here they were putting together a piece of legislation that's supposed to control the big bad bankers.
Now, when you say most of the wealth in the world, how much money are you talking about? Like, comparable to today's money, how wealthy were the Rockefellers and the J.P. Morgan Chase if they were compared to today's wealth?
Well, I don't know how to express it in dollars. All I can say is sometimes it's not how much money you actually hold, although they certainly tell a tremendous amount of it. And I think the official estimates of some of the people who were writing about this at the time, in the New York Times, I was going through the microfilm and reading all the editorial comments and the letters to the editors who had official authority, writing and expressing their views on this. And I came up with several quotes that I have in my book. These guys are estimating that this consortium that I just mentioned controls 1/4 of the wealth of the entire world. Now, I look the word control. That doesn't mean they own it, but you don't have to own things to control them. owned the insurance companies. Well, the insurance companies had invested in stocks in a lot of corporations, and the insurance companies actually controlled the voting of the stock. So a big enough block of it, anyway, that they could determine who is elected as the president, and they could determine the board of directors and all that sort of thing. But they could only maybe hold 5% or 3% of the actual stock of the company, but if you concentrate that much, it's easy, relatively, to dominate. So when you add all of that together, these people control 1/4 of the world, the world, assets of the world at that time. How many dollars that would be, I have no idea. That's actually better than
So one state has this at Decalize. They all agree that they're coming out with the Federal Reserve app. How was it sold to the American people once they left?
Well, it was sold to the American people on the basis that they had this last degree of control of the big bad bankers, making sure that the banks operated honestly and don't go bankrupt. People wouldn't lose their projects to the bank anymore. All these backed up creditors of the United States people overlooking every aspect of the business to make sure there were no inside deals and all that sort of thing. He told us it's just a wonderful thing, and that's the message. At least that was the story. But it's interesting when you get into to see that a lot of that story was coming from the bankers themselves. They had hired they had formed organizations that looked like grassroots organizations, but they were formed by people, economists. Sometimes they were professors, sometimes they were business people, but who all were dependent, economically dependent on the bankers for their livelihood. They would go out and form some local group like the Chicago Community Banking Association, and they kept college professors and had nice demand from the bank, and they would write up a pamphlet. This is a wonderful thing. This is going to be, this is going to stabilize the reserves and savings. It was coming from everywhere, but what people didn't know is that it was all coming from the same source. And even some of the bankers went so far to write articles and give speeches that they knew would be publicized, where they criticized the very thing they had created. They had said it. One guy had said, well, you know, this is going to be bad for America. It's going to hurt business. And you know, a lot of people did that. And I can just hear them correct. Hey, Maud, this is the thing. The bankers don't like it. The Reserve Act is pretty good. So they were playing that game. They were playing a brilliant selection. And that's how they got it through.
How has this, ever since it came out, hurt America? How has it helped? So what's been the positive impact and the negative impact?
Well, it sounds extreme to say that I cannot think of any positive impact. But it's true. I cannot think of any positive impact.
Any? None?
None. I cannot think of any because it's a parasite. It's a fraud. It's based on a lie. It's a cartel. Now, we have to understand, when a cartel is formed, it has only one purpose, and that's to advance the benefit of the members of the cartel, period. Anything beyond that, if you were president or an executive officer of an oil cartel, and you started about what's good for the people of Venezuela or Mexico, and maybe we ought to cut our prices and our profit margins so we can benefit the poor people of Mexico, you'd be out of a job in a heartbeat. So the same thing is true with the banking cartel. They have to talk endlessly about stabilizing the economy and, making jobs and preserving the purchase power of the dollar and all these good things. But in their hearts, no, that's just for cover. All they're concerned about is what is best for the banks. And if you doubt that, just take a look at the report card. If we were to give the Federal Reserve System a report card from 1913 on, when it was formed supposedly to stabilize the purchasing power of the dollar and provide all these good benefits to people, it would fail. If you failing marks all the way down. They've never succeeded. It's led us into a couple of the greatest depressions you can imagine. It's leading us into a huge depression any day now. It's already happening. And the purchasing power of the dollar has lost 97% since 1913. It takes, 97% of the purchasing power of the dollar has been lost since 1913 under the guidance of the Federal Reserve System.
How do you come up with that number? How is that number? When you say 97%, that means it's 3 cents to a dollar. How do you come up with that number, 97%?
Those numbers come from the Federal Reserve System itself, believe it or not, because there are studies on what is inflation, what's the inflationary effect. And those numbers are really easy to find, by the way. It's kind of hard to distort them. It's a hard number. What does it cost to buy a pound of hamburger in 1913 or today? What does it cost for a milk, a gallon of gas? We have no gas. But we're changing it to try and soften the impact. But no matter how often we change it, even in my lifetime, I remember for a penny, about a penny candy, for a penny I could go to the store and get a nice big chunk of candy, one that cost me $1 today, or 50 cents per short. Anyway, these numbers are readily available, and so if anybody wants to reach out to them, I don't blame them because it's a hard figure. Look it up. You'll find it easily on the internet. 97% has been purchasing power has been eroded since 1913. So the Federal Reserve, which is supposed to be the guardian to prevent all of this stuff, gets a failing mark on the report card. But now, if you understand, as I think, that is not the goal of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not a government. It's not formed to protect the people. It's the cartel. It's formed to protect the banks. Now, if you realize that that is their goal, and give another report card, man, they get all A's because the banks always get bailed out every time they get into trouble. The banks may fail, but they get the taxpayers to cough up the money somehow, and they're back in business again, doing all their same tricks again. The banks are always making record profits, and so we understand it's a cartel, and on that basis, it gets all straight A's.
So what can, I guess the part that it goes for me is the following. You have 1913 as Federal Reserve, and then I believe it's August 15th of 71 is when we went away from gold standard. It may be August 18 or August 15 of 71 when we went away from the gold standard during Nixon era. So if you have Federal Reserve, you have gold standard, you have quantitative easing, right? Which is, let's print as much money as possible to bail people out. If there's gold standard, can the country keep printing money even though we are on a gold standard?
It depends on the standard. They speak of the gold standard that we were on, and it wasn't a pure standard. It was a percentage, a sliding scale. I don't think the currency has ever been on 100% standard. It's always been partial. If it were 100%, in other words, if every dollar that was printed had to be backed 100% by gold or silver, which has never been the case, as I then you cannot print any money until that bullion is in the vault. But if the standard is, say, 50% gold, and the fraction of reserve banking, which it always has been, banks are allowed to loan more than they actually have. When they do that, they give the banks the money. Fraction of reserve. All happens. That means that they can loan money that they don't have. It's amazing. It's an amazing deal. And the fraction has always gone down. It starts off high, and then almost every year we have a new law and new regulation where the fractions have been increased or decreased. So finally it's 50%, then 40%, 30%, 22%, 5%, and now it's 0%. So when you have no reserves, then there's no limit to the amount of money that you can create. Now, it's not as easy as that. anything that gives the bank unlimited inventory of money that they can loan out, they like that. If you restrict their inventory, they can only loan out a little bit because that's the only gold they have. They don't like that because they're losing opportunities to make interest. So the idea has always been, from the beginnings, to make that reserve requirement small as possible. And then finally, after 1971, they're just gone completely. Now there's no requirement at all. So the banks have unlimited inventory of money that they can loan out. All they have to do now is convince the people to borrow it, which is why they're always sending you stuff through the mail. Would you like to take out a new credit card? Would you like to borrow some money on your house? Would you like to have a new car? Always trying to promote loans. And then, of course, the big deal is they go to countries, third world countries, and say, how would you like $1 billion to improve your infrastructure? And the politicians there, $1 billion, that's a lot of money. And the other group goes down and gets left over, so they go for it. And of course, they can't pay it back. And the banks knew that at the beginning. They'll never be able to pay it back. So now the banks can even start to take over the natural resources. A lot of it is done. They took money that they created by the loan itself. The loan was backed by the natural resources of the country, so they can't pay the loan. Now banks get access to the natural resources of the country. It's a beautiful deal. I mean, when I say beautiful, I mean it's horrible. But this is how the banking industry has grown and become so powerful in politics and economics all over the world. They literally control countries by putting them into debt.
I'm familiar with that. I don't know if you're familiar with Economic Hitman by John Perkins. He wrote the book. I mean, that's pretty much the business model, and that's what China is doing right now with Africa, with a lot of different countries. They put $15 billion into Armenia, $400 billion into Iran. It's a model that actually works very effectively, by the way, and you force them out. But, okay, so pre-1913, pre-Federal Reserve, did banks have a limit on how much they could lend out?
Yes, there was some limit, and of course it depended on the state. Remember, prior to 1913, the same deal that I'm talking about, the same fractional reserve banking system was in operation. That didn't start in 1913. That had been in existence long before that, and each state had its own rules and regulations as to what discounts were and what the ratios, the reserve ratios would be, and so forth. None of them were very good, and in fact, that's the era in which all these banks were started up. And so, the government fixed the problem, but had not been fixed. The states themselves, the states were just so the problem predated the Yes, true.
So then that means the Federal Reserve, all it did is it became an insurance policy to prevent banks from going out of business. Outside of that, what other negatives did it do?
Well, I think that in itself is because it was all they did was they looked at all come together and said, well, some banks are failing, maybe the others on this side. But they never did insurance. They never, because how would you insure something? No insurance company that had to insure a product to its stockholders would ever take on that kind of a risk. They called it an insurance company. They called it, the FDIC, but it was really, what they were doing is forcing the taxpayers to guarantee the losses of the bank. It wasn't, those premiums were not coming from the banks completely because the FDIC knew that they didn't have adequate funding for it, so that when the day of reckoning came, they would go to the taxpayers and say, okay, we're just going to create more money out of nothing to pay off the insurance. It was not real insurance at all. It was a political scheme.
So how have the American people paid a price for the 1913 Federal Reserve Act? What's the price we've paid?
Well, the price we've paid is the loss of 97% of our savings. Anybody that's lived long enough, they took the dollars well back in 1913 and pulled it out of the bank today. Now, of course, if they had left it in the banks or something, the rest of it, in net, they would have lost it. Right? dead short against the economy of the system. They're nobody working on assets anymore. It's all on debt. They don't realize that means a significant proportion of all of the productivity of whatever venture comes out of that loan to business venture. It goes to the banks as interest on this money created out of debt, instead of going into the pockets of the people who produce the asset, build the house, mix the cement, or design the house, so forth. It gets cycled up to the financial services industry. And this is not productive at all. It hurts in that way. It also hurts it hurts because the system eventually falls apart. In history, there's never been a nation or culture or geographical system that's followed this idea of money out of nothing. There's been no country that's ever survived that. It's always collapsed economically, and usually concurrently with foreign invasions when they realize that the nation is weak, it's struggling, it's on its knees, and some foreign invader comes in and says, aha, this is our moment. Don't think the Chinese are not looking at us with that kind of thought.
But you're saying this has never happened in history. Has there ever been a nation that has experienced as much exponential growth from 1913 till today, the amount of wealth that has been made, the amount of technology advancement that America has created due to being able to loan money to innovators that have turned that into business? Yes, we've lost a lot, we've turned it into a lot of economy and jobs and all this other stuff.
Welcome.
When in history has it happened where we can look back and say, look what happened to dot,
You
dot,
entered
dot.
a new level of computer games.
And keep this in mind. I'm not sitting here
Level
endorsing the Federal
1.
Reserve. I'm not defending them. All I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you all the arguments of what an opposition would say to see what your response is to that. So one, when has it ever been where an empire as big as America had their own Federal Reserve, where a handful of people went away and made that decision and it eventually fell? And if it fell, why did it fall? And number two, if we didn't have the 1913 Federal Reserve where the lending was taking place with banks for them to make more money, what if that lending
Stop
didn't
the
take
game.
place? Would we have the level of innovation that we've had in the last 107 years?
Yeah, those are questions that need to be asked. You're quite right. These are the kinds of arguments that we hear all the time. Every time I came across that was shortly after my book was published. I was scared to death because I wrote this book about banking, money, not my field. Didn't know beans about it when I started.
Start the game!
I've made some
Level
mistakes,
2.
and I'm sure that once the book is out, I'm going to be crucified by some college professor and say, well, you're wrong on this, you're wrong on that. I'm going to be destroyed, but here I go. And so I was nervous about that. And then finally, the day happened, I'm sure. And I was invited to the radio station and I finished the talk about the book. But when I got to the studio, I found out that it was not really amazing. It was doing something great. And on the other side of the table was a college professor from the So I sat down on opposite sides of the table, one side, and my side. And so the interviewer asked me to present my case, and I did. Probably took me about 3 minutes to sort of summarize the answer to your
Level
question.
3.
What does this cost us? Why we don't like it, and so forth. And I went through all of that. And then he turned over to the college professor and said, what is your comment on that?
You've
And it was
received
long
a
pause.
new weapon.
And I'm waiting. Another one. And this is what he said. He said, well,
You're now transmitted
everything
to a
is
hybrid world.
but we're living well, aren't we? And there it was. There it was. That is the only argument I have ever heard coming from the academic field. Because everything I said, fortunately, was true. I say fortunately, I mean, I had made mistakes, serious ones. But unfortunately, it was so damaging to the economy. So,
Level
that is the
4.
argument that we're living well. We are part of the answer to that question is, no, we're not. Some people are living very well, and people like the professor, and people in the banking fraternity, and people in commerce who benefit from all this easy loan, and who benefit from government grants come out of this, they do well because they're on the high end. But the people at the bottom end of the structure are not doing as well because they're losing their savings, they're losing their purchasing power. The middle class is being pushed down. And these are the unnoticed people. They work harder and harder to get pay raises every year. Oh, hey, Mary, look, I got a 5% pay raise. Hooray, hooray. And she says, yeah, but that's yours. So he was looking at the high end of the social structure. And I'm looking at the benefits. All together, we weren't living as well. And the theory behind that is that with all of the business failures and the loss of money and the theft of money from one class to another, that all of these things are worth it so long as the nation as a whole advances in productivity. What if we didn't have any of that? The assumption is that we didn't steal from everybody, if we didn't lie to them, if we take that out of the equation, then we couldn't advance. Somehow we didn't meet the paying them. And I believe that's just the opposite issue. Without the drain on the economy, these banks have caused short circuit taking the profits of productivity out of the hands of people who produce and put it into the hands of people who don't produce, but simply manipulate the money. I think that has hurt that we want to see. I think our standard of living and all of the things you mentioned would be twice as high without that. So if we only look at one class of society, we only look at the benefit without thinking of the harm that's been done, then we can come up with that conclusion. But when we put the whole thing together and shake it up in a bag and look what's in there, it doesn't look good. It doesn't make it
So what if we didn't? Do you really think America's innovation would be at the levels that we have today, 107 years later?
Oh, that's easy. My belief. Now, we don't know because it's never been tried. No, quote, civilized society has ever tried to get along with this fractional reserve banking. But my belief is that yes, we would be far more advanced than we are now.
How?
Well, because our progress might have been slower because money was not so easy, but it wouldn't have been the ups and the downs, the booms and the busts. See, we always think about the booms, but we forget what happens when the bust happens. And people are on the streets and asking for food, and they're out of a job and so forth. We just think, oh, the prosperity, yeah, it's the sawtooth. In general, if you back far enough away and don't see the sawtooth in there, it looks like it's going up, and it is. But if you get close enough to see the ups and the downs of this project, I think if you just lowered the upside of the sawtooth in order to eliminate or decrease the downside of the sawtooth, that the flattened curve, let's say, like would have a steeper ascendancy than the one with all the sawtooth.
I'm really trying to see that. I'm in the business world, and I'm a math guy, and I've been in the financial industry since the day before 9/11, so I'm 37, 66, 31, 26, like health. And if you buy an American funds mutual fund called Investment Company Act of America, it was started, I want to say, in 1934. Okay, if you open up the perspective from 1934 till today, you will see a rate of return on average of 12% from 1934 till today. Now, for full disclosure, the last time I sold a mutual fund was in September of 2009. So I have not sold a mutual fund since September of 2009. I have to just kind of put that out there. So when you do look at the economy from 34 till today, it has, I mean, that's just not the economy. Well, one of the perspectives, a fund. But even if you go to the S&P 500 and you look at an average, you'll see the number 10 or 12% that the market's grown year after year after year after year after. Of course, we've had a crisis. Of course, we've had wars. We've had assassinations. We've had very unfortunate events that's taken place. But for you to say that we would be at the same level of innovation and advancements as we are today, if not more, if we didn't lend, I don't see how that's possible, because it's kind of like saying the following. In the business world, if you go listen to Reed Hastings, he is the founder, he's the gentleman running Netflix, and you're probably familiar with the name Reed Hastings. He just came out with a book. A lot of these Silicon Valley guys, or the entrepreneurs, or the venture capital private equity guys, will say when you're starting a company, go raise as much money as possible. Raising money is a form of going into debt. You can either get a loan, which you're not going to get when you're a startup, Or you can go say, I'll give you 40% of my company, 30% of my company for $28 million. So round one, hey, we'll do 10 million. You know this stuff. You've read about this. You're familiar with this. So if you don't raise the money, you can't accelerate hiring, technology, office space, advancement, partnership. You just can't make the product as good as you could because you have to make everything cheaper. So I sit there and I see the negative aspect of purchasing power. 97% between the dollar is now worth 3 cents, but that's because of inflation, which they fully have control over. And I fully see that as a big problem. I mean, you heard Powell yesterday say the fact that they're not going to raise the rates until 2023 until inflation goes back to 2%. But you say advanced, you don't get the same level. I would really want you to dissect that a little bit more. Maybe I'm not getting it because I don't see how advanced one would get the same level if we weren't lending.
Well, the assumption there is that we're not lending. I'm not talking about that. I think that's very important. I'm talking about getting rid of all of it. I'm talking about did it. He got it in one lesson. So I'd like to paraphrase that lesson for you because we're talking about that now. Hazlitt said, and get this right, when analyzing the merits or the demerits of any economic proposal, we must not consider just the effect of it on one person or group of people for a short period of time, but we should look at the effect on all groups of people and all individuals over a long period of time. And that is it. When you just look at the good things that happen and forget the bad things, for example. You look at, here's somebody that deserves to be helped, but you don't think about all the people that don't deserve to have the money taken out of their pockets so that you can help this one person. Maybe you put those people into poverty, you know. If you look at all aspects of the equation over a long period of time, it's a whole different story. I think that lesson of economics applies to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean,
Enjoy.
I can, like, when you're saying honest system, what
Let
is
yourself
really an
go
honest system?
and enjoy the bass fly.
I have kids. I have 3 kids. I'm not aware of if you have kids or, you know, yourself. But if you do have kids, you know how kids are. If you tell them you can't do this, you already know what they're going to be doing. If you put certain rules, kids want to break the rules. and not much is different than adults.
Let
You know, if
yourself
you
go
create certain rules,
and enjoy
we have a
the
tendency to want to
baseline.
break rules, right? If you create laws, I don't know how many people here have gone 66 miles an hour on a 65, or, you know, even maybe 75 or 85. There's an element of wanting to break those rules a little bit for us where it's going to happen. The only thing when I sit there and I look at America, here's how I see America. And I may be wrong, but this is how I view America, and I'd love to see your take on this. I see if America was an
Enjoy
individual.
the bass
You
life.
take all the countries, say the 200 plus countries that we have. If America was an individual, America would be the one that is not comfortable being one of the best, is not comfortable being a top 10, a top 50, is not comfortable just being content and living a regular life. I see America as the individual that says, I want to be the best of the best of the best. I want to be Michael. I want to be Brady. I want to be Tiger. Whoever it is, I want to be the best, right? And if somebody in the world of business wants to be the best, what do they typically do? They're a little bit more aggressive. They're not as conservative. You know, you don't hear a lot of conservative, you know, people that became extremely wealthy. Conservatives are conservative. You know, they are very good citizens. You want to live around conservatives. You want to live in a community where people are conservative. But there's an element of risk involved, and I think America took so much risk with this debt that, yes, a price was paid, but also at the end, the level of innovation where you and I are able to sit here. I don't know where you are. I'm in Dallas, Texas, and we're able to do this interview, and we're able to use this little machine that was started by a guy named Steve Jobs in Wozniak in California. I just can't see that innovation part that you said. What I would like to spend some talking about with you is the following, is inflation. How, you know, when you look at business, like you have right now, Trump is going against Biden, everybody's looking at the tax plan. Trump is saying he's going to lower his capital gains taxes to 15%. Biden's already publicly said that. I got the email from Goldman Sachs that Biden's raising the capital gains to 39.6. Biden's economic plan is going to cost America $5.3 trillion over the next decade. That's the highest ever, 5.3, 5.4. So if American people are sitting there watching that, what is scarier in your eyes? Inflation, taxes, or politicians? What concerns you more?
Looking for the love I hope to find.
I'll let you reserve that for a moment because I would have
Hoping I'm not wasting all my time.
about
Looking for the love I hope to find.
I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Waiting in the corners of my mind.
We all want to be the best. We do like to think we're worthy. So we try very hard to do our best, to be proud of ourselves. That doesn't mean that we want to start cheating them, stealing from them, lying to people, taking advantage of them. Like that. That's an ethical consideration. And I think what's happening to America is not because it has the desire to be best or be very, very good, but because of, like that I can start education system, media, entertainment system. That aside, whatever it is, America has continued to destroy moral, ethical principles. We're now superheroes in the movies, or in the books, or the guys the ones that don't look at it. In other words, the bad guys, as we would call them, the heroes, the ones that I remember back when I was young, all of them, the role model to good people, they would never accept they were good people, in addition to being successful. In those days, we could say that, yes, somebody could have a lot of money, still be an honest, a worthy person. Now we've got the idea, well, if you've got a lot of money, well, it might be true, but the two are not necessarily.
Looking for
I just wanted to get that out
I
by
hope
saying
to
that
find.
our problem that you just mentioned is more
Hoping
I know I had a follow-up question with you with what's the bigger threat, inflation. Let's stay on that topic if you don't mind. Before we move forward. So, when you're saying cheating, moral, all that stuff, okay, fine, I agree. But I also think that is a byproduct of the way taxes are set up. I think that's a byproduct of how regulation is set up. I think that's a byproduct of how loose money was in 2007. They were lending money to just about anybody, and the loan officers had no kind of thing to have controls or filters, and they were just lending money to everybody, and they didn't care if they were showing any incomes or assets. So it was very, very loose. So there becomes a pendulum in my mind where on one side you have Milton Friedman back here. He was not much of a fan of too many regulations. Deregulation, of course, everything's about deregulation, deregulation, deregulation. But he was a fan of law. And if I do recall, he would talk about how China back in 1984, had only 4 major law schools. They had only a couple thousand attorneys who were living in China. In a country with 1 billion plus people, they didn't have a lot of attorneys. They didn't have a lot of lawyers. So I think a part of that is enforcing what is in place, and enforcing what is in place is what gets some people to say, I don't know if I want to mess with this. I mean, the recent shooting that took place in Louisville, Kentucky, where they have to now pay out $12 million. I think that's a great thing, because now other cities and states are going to enforce a little bit more training into their police officers to not just walk in and start, shooting because you are seeing something as a threat. But then that could be a good thing. I think certain things that are taking place, if they find the shooter in Compton that shot the 2 cops, I think he needs to get the highest level of punishment for others to say, you just don't shoot cops. Where I'm going with this is the following. Ethics, integrity, all of that is a byproduct of the way rules and regulations are set up today. And if they're set up in a low standard way where we're looking past it, people are going to keep breaking rules. So for me, I totally agree with you there. But I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what is the biggest threat of Federal Reserve, and I have something in mind. I'm curious to know if we're going to end up getting there on this interview. Thoughts?
Well, if I could just comment on that too, but I agree with everything you said, by the way. But the idea of whether the chicken and egg sort of thing, whether the ethics come from the rules are formed by people with low ethics.
I agree with that.
Yeah, because people like you and I, hopefully we wouldn't be corrupted by power in our hands. We wouldn't have that. Because it's what we carry around inside our heads and our hearts. We wouldn't have that. But unfortunately, when people are born into the system, everything they're exposed to, their schools, motion pictures, songs they hear on the radio are glorifying a very low standard of ethics or different standards. Then it's not surprising that the society starts to have rules and regulations to enforce them. So I don't know, it's a chicken and egg thing, it's bad, and we have to reverse it. I do believe that it's a product of this fact that we have bought into this thing called collectivism, which means that we believe that the group is more important than the individual. I don't believe this, by the way, but many people were taught this in school, like I was, that the group is more important than the individual, and that everything is a numbers game. If you get 51% of the people who want something, then that's going to be the right thing to do, even if it means plundering the other 49%. And it's a bad system. I think everything is political. There are no standards. The truth is what you want it to be. All of these things, oh my gosh. It's got to come, reform I think has to start at that ideological level before we can have rules and regulations. But I think because we have brought in the idea that everything should be measured and controlled by law, that when people are elected to Congress, they have one job, they have to go to Congress and make laws, more laws, all day long, pass more laws. You'll find that we've got 100 million, trillion, billion, billions of laws, and we have no rules. Which is the law for everything, including how we grow our nose. And we buy into that because we think each law, it's good.
Yeah.
So once we get to that point, the laws are, they're horrible. They're not good at it.
about what
Probably do that anyway.
Yeah, she's gonna do what she's gonna. If you're so worried about what your son is gonna do and what drugs or alcohol, so like you try to fully, they're eventually gonna be like, why is that so worried about this? So I couldn't agree with you more on what you're saying. But let's go back to the next topic here. So, what is a bigger concern to you? You've been around, you research a lot, you've read a lot, and stuff that's pre my era and pre my former generation. You've been reading a lot of stuff on what's going on, done a lot of research with your 48 books. What do you see as the biggest threat today? You know, is it inflation? Is it taxes? Is it media? Is it politicians? Is it China? What is the biggest threat today that we're facing?
Hard to pick a biggest. I would say the biggest threat, if it wasn't even on your list, is the fact that the population of the world has been denied so that they are incapable of making good decisions. They look at the world through their television screens or computer screens. They think everything they see in front of that little screen or in that screen is reality. They look up the window and see the rain on the bed on the radio and the shining. That's scary because as long as can be programmed, passively accept conditionally accept authority without question, there is no hope for mankind. Because authority sooner or later will figure out how to dominate their minds and control them in every way possible.
It's a pretty deep answer right there. And what's the price of that? What is the price of that long term?
Well, the price of that is that we cease being humans. We cease being, in the sense, humans of our full potential, having freedom of will, freedom of choice, freedom of logic to reach a decision or to question, freedom to think even. We become like robots. And of course, that's what a lot of this transhumanism really is all about, is to convert the present state of affairs into two classes of humans. One are the ruling elite, who will remain pretty much as humans always have been, but maybe genetically selected to choose only the best and the highest of us. But the rest of us to be gradually dumbed down, chemically, electromagnetically, through information, starvation into robots. That's the penalty. I know that's where we're headed. Because the people that are doing it write about it. We talk about it in the books. They think how wonderful it's going to be. And at first I thought, well, that's pretty weird. This will never happen. But now I see AI developing and transhumanism and more artificial things happening. People can blend their bodies with
It began in Africa.
The opposition, those who oppose capitalism, they'll go and say that Karl Marx was a noble man because, he felt that capitalism is so competitive, he's so hardworking, he's so ambitious, he seeks more money and greed that he's eventually going to create so much wealth and not go on competition with his ambition with his kids and spend that quality time with his advancement goes at the level that it does, eventually it's going to destroy itself and implode. What do you say to that part of the argument? Because you're a capitalist yourself, you're pro-capitalism, you're pro-freedom, you're pro-choice, pro-freedom of thinking, all of that, but at the same time, you're concerned about the advancement and the levels we're going with AI. Are we advancing and innovating a little too fast or a little too quickly?
Well, there's a couple of
It
components
began
to
in Africa.
the general opinion of what Marx really was. What you just said is nothing to do with Marxism, but a lot of students think about it. They don't want to cooperation. But maybe nature can be destroyed. Maybe nature can be converted into a
It began in Africa.
Either way, it's a scenario I don't think it's a good thing. I don't want to think about that for myself, or my children, or my great-great-great-great-grandchildren, or anybody in the future. So I think if humans really were as smart as they like to think of themselves, they would stand back and say, we don't tinker with the building blocks of life. We just don't tinker with them because they're perfect as they are. They've lasted hundreds of thousands, if not millions or trillions of years. You can argue over the length of time, but they're pretty good, and they show a great deal of intelligence and design and functionality that's far beyond anything that Einstein or any human could come up with. Why are we tinkering with this thing when we think, or I think, all we can do is mess it up? So that's my answer to your question. I don't think it's a question of are we going too fast. I just think we should.
Long is much too bright.
Where is there? When you say this or there, what is there or what is this thing?
I'm talking about.
Tell me then
AI?
why you
No, it's not AI. That's just
Giving
a
a
computer
damn.
algorithm. AI is fine. I
Long
don't
is
see
much too
that
bright.
as a threat. But when we implant AI into mechanical devices, they're
tell me
capable
then
of
why you-
challenging humans or becoming part of
giving a
humans
damn.
or replacing humans. Now we're in this whole different realm. I think AI can be very productive and very useful in computer programming and solving
Tell me
problems.
then why you
That doesn't mean we have to replace human instinct and human senses of morality and make them whatever we program into the AI. If we want an AI device to
tell
think
me
that
then
it's
why
moral to kill people, well, then you just tweak the code a little bit, and all of a sudden AI says, I just got a good thing, I killed 10 people. Hooray for me, This is stupid to go into that kind of stuff.
It's not about being stupid or not being stupid. It's called point of no return. You can't do nothing about it right now. There's nothing the two of us can do about the speed of innovation today. Nothing. Literally the amount of time it'll take for all the lawmakers and legislators to come out with new laws to prevent this. A new innovation in technology will come out that'll take them another 12 to 24 months to come out with the new regulations. It is the point of no return. One doesn't go without the other. You cannot have a capitalistic society and recognize innovation and individualism, but tell them, well, don't cross the line and pass that limit. The whole idea of limitless. We have no limits. That goes with the whole ingenuity, that creativity of a capitalist and an entrepreneur. Can you do it faster? Can you do it better? Can you do it bigger? Can you do it more efficient? So it's another one of those things where in life, this is what I've learned. Again, I'm only 41 years old, and the older I get, the more I realize, Mr. G, how many flippant contradictions there are in life. Life is filled with contradictions. You have one philosophy that gets clear in this area, boom, there's a little bit of a contradiction in it. You get this philosophy, boom, there's a little bit of contradiction in it. But in this area, when it does come down to innovation, I think if all the nice people got together and they all prayed together, I don't think they can slow down innovation, or I don't think they can slow down from these young creators to say, I'm not going to stop creating and trying to do it better than whoever did it prior to me. I just don't see that happening. But
Well,
I
I'm
do
afraid
agree with
I have a fear that you might be right. It certainly seems correct that way, but there's one part of it that's encouraging.
tell me then
And
why
that is
you
you talk about this innovation and all of its dangerous innovation is a product of capitalism or enterprise. And I would like to challenge that because I think most of the money being spent for these kinds of things
tell me then
either
why
are
you
coming from organizations like DARPA, the military research, or governments of one kind, because they're not really doing this in order to make a profit. They're doing this because they
Tell me
intend
then
to
why you-
control human beings. So the motivation is
You
not...
really believe that? You really believe that?
I'm totally convinced of that. I would probably have to do some research to get some numbers together on it, but I think what you would find if you trace the money that's going into this kind of research,
tell me then why you
almost all of it has its origins from governments. And there's some companies that invest in it. Take a look at the companies where they're getting the money. Who's paying them? Who's giving them the contracts? And so forth. And I think you would be surprised to find that most of it is probably coming from they don't care about the condition. That's not why they want to do it because they want to
Tell me
create
then why
a
you
system what they can control. And not be worried about facing a revolution.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I think some of that could apply to Iran or to China or to North Korea or to some regimes who fully try to control their people. And don't get me wrong, I am very aware of some of these places in Alaska where they're creating technology to learn how to control people. I've read many of these articles, and I've gone to some, rabbit holes that you can find yourself staying in for a few weeks, and you come out thinking you're living in La La Land, or you're on shrooms, you're smoking some of the best hash from the Middle East. But and then you realize, no, there's some of the stuff that's actually true, and it is kind of happening. But how much of it is just to control the people in a free speech country, and how much of it is to prevent from a country like China who tried to take over and impose their police system of total control and 100% submission to the way the government runs?
That is
Maybe it's preventing from a country like China to become the biggest empire by 2025, where they can't and that's the part of it. And at the end of the day, one of the things that I believe, here's what I fully believe. This is what I fully believe in. And you have the wisdom. I'm still a baby next to you. I'm still learning. This is why I'm still reading books, to get myself to get sharper and wiser and talk to people like yourself so I can elevate my level of thinking. I just believe in human beings. It's that simple for me. I believe in human beings having dreams, having hearts, caring for people, because one of the greatest systems God created is, even if you didn't care about people, when you have kids, you go through this process of wanting to treat others better because you hope somebody else treats your daughter better. You hope somebody returns it to you. Natural form of karma, whether you believe in God or not. I just believe in human beings, and I think long term, I'm banking on human beings having the collective courage to fight for their individual dreams and not be pansies, not be afraid, not be cowards. That's what I'm banking on.
I like that message a lot better than the fall movement. I thought it was too late for anybody to do anything about it. I think.
Well, no. What I said is, half of my brain supports one argument, the other half supports the other one, but my heart is totally on the side of your last statement. Yeah, I think, and the key to that is that as long as we are humans, as long as they don't mess us up and prevent us from creating other human beings, which they're definitely working on that. Yeah, putting stuff in our air, in our drinking water, in our food, to cut down not only the quantity of procreation, our reproductive rates, but the quality of it as well. They can particularly our genetic structure as well. And if we don't stop that, I mean, we're not going to be human. Or our great-great-grandchildren are not going to be human. You're going in a different direction. And now we're talking vaccine. Now we're talking vitamin B17. Now we're talking a whole different slew of things that we can get into, and this thing can get into 3 hours. But I think we may want to leave that for a part 2 discussion where the two of us can have, because today's topic's been very deep. It's been very deep. It's been very interesting. I've really enjoyed it. And your point of view on the way you've shared your experiences and perspective, it's great to hear. And I hope the audience goes and orders your book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. If you've never read it, it's a must. We're going to put the link below to the book as well. And Mr. G, if you don't mind, I'd like to do a speed round with you. I'll give you a name of an individual. I want you to tell me one word that comes to mind, okay? Speed round. Give you a name.
This is dangerous.
This is dangerous. I'll be very honest with you. I want to be very transparent. This can be very dangerous here. So, J.P. Morgan Chase. Greenspan. Paul Volcker. Powell.
Poor chap. Maybe I come up with more words to say the same thing as that Bush argument.
Nixon. remember that one song.
I know. And a lot of people are going to say, well, I was just
Yeah, I mean that's but you know at least you're consistent. You know,
I
because
tried.
you just threw the audience off a little bit because it was a little bit interesting. So you say both Trump and Obama and all of them are puppets, including Biden. So who are the ones at the top that are moving all the puppets, if they are the puppets?
Well, we started off talking about that.
Okay, got it.
That's the financial world.
Who are they today, by the way? Who are those people today?
Well, you know, the names, I don't really pay much attention to the individual names. We know what dynasties they are. We know that the two big ones, of course, are the Rothschilds in Europe and the Rockefellers in North America, and all of the people that play up to them and so, you know, are in their entourage, all the banks. Then you get into the banking families. I'm sure they're still active, but the main center is the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. It's as simple as that. But there are a lot of other people. I mean, I'm not talking about two people sitting there at the control panel making all the decisions. Those are the guys that have all kinds of lieutenants and their handlers. I mean, people that they sent out to handle. Like, take Kissinger, for example. Kissinger is the bag man of the Rockefellers. When Kissinger shows up, you know that he's speaking for the Rockefellers. And it's not Kissinger speaking, it's the Rockefellers. So then Kissinger has his people that represent him. I mean, there's a whole pyramid structure. I don't pretend to know all the names of how they get, but I recognize them.
I'll give you the final words here to the viewer that's watching this. They're a little bit concerned. They're wanting to go and do a little research. You made a recommendation of a book I read, I don't know, 16 years ago, 17 years ago, Economics in One Lesson. It's a real thin book. We'll put the link to that book below as well. But what would be your final thoughts to a viewer that's watching this saying, well, I want to be more informed. I don't want to be controlled. I want to be a free thinker. What should I be doing? What message do you have for them?
Well, I think the first step that such a person has already taken. When a person says, I want to be more informed, I don't want to be fooled anymore, they've already taken a huge step because that means they understand that there's something wrong and they're not getting the information. So the next step is, well, how am I going to get that information? And that's a direct lead, and I'm glad you gave it to me because I would like to put my upside the red pill expo. Jekyll Island and the Red Pill Expo, sponsored by Rockwell University, is all about what you just said. Where do you get information? Where do you take these red pills that are going to wake you up and cause you to see the reality of the illusions that are out there? And believe me, we've all got them. I'm sure I still have some. A lot of them I don't even know about. Those Bible countries, stuff like that. They're all over the place. Some of them are so if anybody wants to get a place to start, go to redpillexpo.org. Look at that event.
You're going to put that link below as well. Mr. G. Edward Griffin, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we'll have you back here soon.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I hope I haven't bored anybody or scared anybody or insulted too many people, and I'd love to come back, so thank you.
Thank you for your time.
I'm curious, did this interview of the author of Creature from Jekyll Island, does he have you thinking? Are you thinking about the conversations that we had? Comment below what you are still thinking about. But if the topic of economics and what he and I spoke about today intrigues you, I have two other interviews I want you to watch. One is with a former economist, somebody that used to be with Goldman Sachs, Nomi Prince. If you've never seen this before, we talked about Jekyll Island and Federal Reserve. And if you've never seen my interview with Daniel DeMartino Booth, who was with the Federal Reserve of Dallas for 9 years, click over here. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.